Good afternoon. Once again, our shir today is sponsored in memory of Chana Devora Bas Avraham. And please feel free to contact me if you would like to sponsor any of our shiurim. The next Mishnah that we're up to right now in the Ein Yaakov is one that I am aware that it bothers many people for various reasons. And as I was learning it this morning, preparing for the shir, an idea popped into my mind of how to understand the Mishnah in maybe a unique and novel manner, which I'll share with you shortly. But before I do that, I just wanted to unburden myself a little bit with a discussion about the proper way to understand perplexing comments that we find both in Tanakh as well as in the Talmud and the Midrash. There are a lot of people that I've come across who are under a mistaken impression that Orthodox Jews, and certainly Haredi, right-wing Jews, believe that everything that is written in the Torah, the Nevi'im, the Ksuvim, is meant to be understood literally. They also are under the impression that everything that's brought down as midrashic statements, whether it's in the Talmud or in collections of midrashim, are also meant to be taken literally. Now, those statements are false. Let me explain myself. I'll give you one simple example. The Torah talks about a case in which a woman sees her husband involved in a fight with another man. And she decides to get involved, and she acts in a manner which is very embarrassing to her husband's opponent. And the pasuk says, "Vikatsosa eskapa," which literally means chop off her hand. But the Talmud says we don't chop off her hand. And without getting into the intricacies of how the Talmud comes to this conclusion, the Talmud says that it means that she has to pay monetary compensation to the man whom she embarrassed. That is one of countless examples where the Torah says something and Orthodox Judaism does not take it in a literal manner. I'll give you one more example. The pasuk says in Parshas Vayeshev that Ruvain slept with his father's concubine Bilhah. And then the Gemara turns around and says, Kola Omer Ruvain Chata Eina Elotoeh, that anybody who says that Ruvain committed adultery by sleeping with Bilhah is making a mistake. And again, the Gemara goes on to reinterpret what happened in that story, and it actually gives other interpretations to many other stories that we find in Tanakh that give you an impression that one thing happened, and our sages say, no, that's not what happened. It really means that something else happened. So it is very clear that Jewish tradition does not tell us that everything in Tanakh is meant to be taken literally at its face value. Now, the same thing is true with midrashic and Aggadic statements. I would send you to the Ramchal's, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Lutzato wrote a whole Maimer al Ha'agados, in which he discusses the proper approach to understanding Aggadic statements And he speaks about the fact that many Aggadic statements, if you just read them superficially, they are speaking and saying things that are demonstrably false. But he says that Chazal didn't care if the simple pshat of these statements were false, because Chazal were not intending the simple, basic meaning of their statement, but they were alluding to something else. And he discusses the different types of allusions Chazal used. And therefore, you see from this, and again, I could bring for you countless examples where the later commentators clearly did not understand that every midrashic statement was meant to be taken literally. I will tell you that it really disturbs me that the book the Midrash says and the little Midrash says is written in a way which is very popular among both Orthodox children and for teachers as they prepare. It doesn't distinguish at all between what's pshat in a pasuk or what's a midrashic commentary on the pasuk. And we've succeeded in raising a generation of children who don't know the distinction. And unfortunately, for many of them, as they grow up, they also never learn that distinction, or they never become aware of what is pshat in the pasuk and what is a midrashic statement on that pasuk. And therefore, as they grow older and they start to develop questions, but they're stuck with, well, this is what we're taught is the truth according to the Torah, without realizing that things that they were taught as being the absolute gospel truth of the Torah are not, and have never been accepted within the Orthodox community as being the absolute truth. And over the years, what I've sometimes interacted with people who were raised with a Torah education, but then left the path. And when I start trying to discuss with them some of the reasons why they made those choices, and they use as examples various things that they were taught, which are incongruous to them now as adults. And I tried to explain to them, well, time out a second. There's other ways, and there's other traditions of how to understand this Gemara or that Medrash. They have a very difficult time accepting it because it was so drilled into them wrongly that a particular statement is literal and absolute. And that's not really so simple. But since that was so drilled into them, even in their adulthood, that they can't change their minds to understand, to see things from a different perspective. So therefore, as I share with you now the next Mishnah here, as I said, as I was learning this morning, an idea popped into my mind that is a different way of interpreting this Mishnah. I want to make one more thing clear to you. I'm sorry. The fact that I am saying that there are many statements that can be understood not literally, both in terms of understanding Tanakh as well as understanding Midrashim, I am not therefore saying, again, this is my perspective, you don't have to agree with me, but that's really my point I'm about to say now. I'm not saying that I believe that the Torah is elastic enough that therefore you can give any interpretation you want. That is not acceptable from my approach to understanding. And without getting into a lengthy discussion about that particular part, I do believe that there are parameters and rules and regulations of interpreting. But that said, I'm going to share this Mishnah with you, a Mishnah which I was always taught to take very literally, and I believe that most people understand this Mishnah literally. I don't have a problem if you would like to understand it literally. I'm going to offer perhaps a non-literal understanding, and you can be the judge and take it as you wish. The Mishnah says as follows: Al shalosh averos nashim mesos bishas leidasan. For transgressing 3 sins, women die in childbirth. Al she'enan zihiros benida. If they are not careful about the laws of nida, of the halachos regulating a woman's sexual activity around the time of her period, u bechala, and on separating challah when making dough, u behadlokas ner, and not being careful about lighting candles by Friday night. And the first thing that hit me, which I saw some of the commentators discuss, is that this is a funny grouping of 3 mitzvos here, because it's lumping together 3 things that really don't seem to have any connection, because nida and challah are mitzvos in the Torah. Lighting Shabbos candles is a rabbinic commandment, and to take all 3 together and to say that the consequences for all of them are identical is already something that should give a person pause and say, what's going on over here? Why are these 3 things lumped together? And why is the Mishnah saying that there is such a severe punishment for transgressing these 3 things? So I would like to offer the following interpretation. First of all, we find in many places that the word misa, death, doesn't mean that in a literal manner. The Gemara makes it very clear in one place where it speaks about somebody having died. What it really meant is that that person had lost all of his wealth. So clearly, even though the pasuk was using a word indicating death, what it really meant was that the person was diminished. In Kabbalistic terms, anytime something goes from a particular state of holiness and it is then diminished into a lower state of holiness, the Kabbalah will also frequently refer to that as death. So because of those reasons, I feel comfortable over here saying that even though the Mishnah said, use the word mesos, die, we don't have to understand that literally to mean die. And therefore, I want to suggest that what the Gemara is saying when it says for 3 averos, women will die during childbirth, what the Gemara is really, or the Mishnah is really meaning to say, is that there are 3 things that if a mother doesn't do them properly, then it's going to diminish her effectiveness as a parent. It's going to diminish her effectiveness at being able to raise children in the proper path. And I want to suggest that the 3 things that are mentioned over here are as follows. Number 1 is that the power of reproduction, which is a very godlike quality. God is a creator. We are not creators nearly in the way God is, but the closest we come to being creators is in our ability to reproduce. That's really responsibility number 1 as a parent. Challah represents our responsibility as parents to offer sustenance to our children, to support them and to supply them with their material needs and wants. Hadlokas Haner, lighting the Shabbos candles, which I mentioned beforehand, that if we're just understanding this in the simple pshat, doesn't seem to fit with the first two, but I want to suggest that indicates providing our children with the spiritual sustenance that they require. And the Mishnah is telling us that if we are not careful in how we behave, in the way we approach creating our children to begin with, in how we approach sustaining our children physically and sustaining our children spiritually, then that is going to diminish who we are and what we're able to accomplish as parents. That is both my approach to understanding this Mishnah, and again, based on my lengthy introduction, another way of sharing with you and showing you how we can take something which seems to be giving one message and understand it perhaps in a non-literal way, which gives us a completely different message as to what is being shared over here in the Mishnah. Thank you for listening. Have a very good evening, everybody.